So you're a fiction reader who's trying to get into nonfiction. But no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to get through it. So, as someone who was a fiction reader who got into nonfiction later on and is now obsessed with reading nonfiction as well, I'm going to take you through my frameworks to get into reading nonfiction, specifically as a fiction reader. Now, there's two different things to think about for me. The first one is the more important one. It is the base of how you're going to make sure that you enjoy what you read. And then the second one, I would say, is just as important, or maybe not as important, depending on the type of reader you are. I'm a firm believer of like every reader is very unique, and what you like I might not like. So give these a shot, see what works out for you, see what is more important for you, and maybe this is your way of getting into nonfiction. So the first thing, which I personally think is the more important thing, so this is the framework through which the second section of this is going to work for you, and that is content. Content, I think, is incredibly important. First of all, it is literally what you're reading. I think what you're reading is the most important thing to think about, especially when it comes to nonfiction, because it's already going to be something unfamiliar. It might feel a bit textbooky to some of you guys, which I'm going to tell you how to fix that. So the way to really overcome this is to make sure that you're reading things that you, one, care about, and two, things that you're also curious about. So it can be both of these things. So if it's great if you have something that you care about but also something that you're curious about in one. That's ideal. But sometimes it's actually just one of these things. Sometimes it's just something you really care about, something you have a personal stake in. This could be a personal or a social issue. It could be something that you yourself have gone through. A good example for me is that I am someone in diaspora who returned to my home country, and so I seek out a lot of books about diaspora returning to their home countries. It's very personal, but it's something I care about. And I have a lot of favorites because of this in this particular content framework. And then something you're curious about. It could also literally be just something that you're particularly curious about. You might care about mushrooms, or maybe about Persian carpets. It could be something as niche as that. Trust me, there is a nonfiction book out there for you on that niche topic. It could be about things you see on the news. It could be about a particular revolutionary moment in time. It could be about fashion in the 1950s and how that affected social standing in the US. It could be about a niche war or battle. A really fun one for me, for something you're curious about, is science books. So I grew up a STEM kid up until my A-levels, and then I pursued art and design, and I completely am now in arts and humanities. But up until that point, I was a STEM kid, and it wasn't a reluctant thing. I genuinely enjoyed science. It was always this moment of like exploration and excitement, and the thing that I enjoyed most was physics. And so around the time I started reading nonfiction, I started seeking out books on astrophysics, and it's actually one of my favorite subgenres of nonfiction to go for. So this is literally something I'm curious about. Now, if it's both, if it's something you care about and something you're curious about, again, that's ideal, but it doesn't have to be. It could literally just be one of these things, and that works out great as well. So content is extremely important, and this is sort of the framework that you can use to figure out what is the content that you want to consume. The second part of this is format. For some people, format might not matter as much as content, whereas for other people, format might matter way more than content, because as fiction readers, we are used to a particular sort of a format, the chapter by chapter, being able to follow sets of characters, and also going through storylines, going through the ups and the downs. We're used to that, maybe even without realizing. So when you start reading nonfiction, for some people, actually for a lot of people, it might just seem packed with footnotes, maybe too academic feeling, like you're reading a textbook. And I see a lot of people discouraged by this. So this is the way to kind of overcome that problem, is to stick to a couple of formats that I feel like are great as a transition towards nonfiction if you're a fiction reader. Now, what are the three formats? The first one is the one that I turn to for anyone who asks me, like, I want to get into nonfiction, but I've always been a fiction reader. How do I do it? This is the subgenre that I always turn them towards, and that is memoirs. Memoirs. Read all the memoirs. I just think memoirs are such a good transition because they are literally essentially the person who has gone through it is telling you the story. You have a main character, you have a sort of a story format to it. There's usually a chronological system to the way that they narrate the story, their life story, and there's also a angle that they tend to take. So you're already covering all the grounds for what a fiction reader is going to look for. And I've also noticed that a lot of modern memoirs tend to be more narrative, tend to be more storytelling. A good example of this is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I wasn't going to talk about it here, but I think it's a very good example of this. I'm going to recommend a few memoirs here before we move on to the second format. The first few recommendations I'm going to do super quickly because they're really popular mainstream memoirs, but I don't want that to be the reason that you underestimate them, because trust me, they are just as good. These first two memoirs are the books that actually got me into nonfiction. So the first one is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, and the second one is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Both books that I was very hesitant to pick up because at the time I picked them up, I was like a strong fiction reader. I wasn't into reading nonfiction. But I read these and I was like, wait a minute, I have to read more nonfiction. Born a Crime is such an easily digestible book. You can sit down and really enjoy reading this. Trevor Noah does such a good job of balancing humor with heart. So you get your heartfelt moments, and you get these moments where you learn about what it meant to be born during apartheid to a Black mother and a white father, and literally to be born a crime. And you also get his signature humor and his way of kind of managing that. And then Between the World and Me is a totally different book, so it's a bit harder to read of a book. It's written with a lot more academic prose, as coming from Ta-Nehisi Coates' background, and essentially he's writing letters to his son, if I'm not mistaken. It's a son who he's basically introducing his son to life is not going to always be easy, and what it really means to be young and Black in America in a very like day-to-day way. And this is something that I had never thought of before, and it really shifted my perspective on racism. So this is the two books that really got me into reading nonfiction. Another thing I'm gonna add here is that one of the coolest things about nonfiction is that once you read one book you're already going that you really like, you're already gonna have like 10 books you want to read, because a lot of these books have footnotes and reading lists, and it's just gonna provide you a bunch of other stuff that you're gonna want to read. But other than that, also when you enjoy one of these books, you know that, hey, I want to read either one, more from this author, or two, you know, a particular issue or a particular topic that you want to read more on. And nonfiction is endless. There is so much content out there that you can read. So these were the two books that kind of made me think, oh my god, I really like reading about racism and understanding it from all of these different perspectives and having a very broad understanding of it. And these were the two books that got me to that place. The third one is also extremely popular, but it's worth mentioning just because it's so close to my heart, and that's When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. I repeat, do not underestimate this book. I think this is one of the most interesting memoirs I've read. It's very short, and this made me sob. This is to this day the book that has made me cry the most in my entire life. I cried so much, and it was just simply because I saw so much of myself in Paul Kalanithi. If you've never heard of this book, Paul Kalanithi was a neurosurgeon who got diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer, and he starts this book kind of taking you through the journey of going through that and explaining his life story to you. What really hit close to home for me was I saw a lot of myself in him, and to watch someone that you see so much of yourself in go through this was gut-wrenching. And I remember recommending this to my sister and putting a tissue in there because I was like, girl, you're gonna cry. But yeah, memoirs, have a lot of impact because these are real people and you get to step into their shoes and live their life. And I think that is one of the coolest things ever. Like, you have so many memoirs from people from so many different backgrounds and places and positions in life. If again, refer to your content framework, what is something you care about or you're curious about, and pick a memoir that reflects that, and likely you're going to really enjoy it. The next two memoirs I'm going to just quickly recommend is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is very much in the vein of something you care about. I think this is the single most important book you're going to read about sexual assault. Chanel Miller is an incredible writer, but she also puts herself in such a vulnerable position to allow a reader into her real world and what it means for her to have gone through what she went through. And this is another thing about nonfiction, especially with memoirs, that I think is so special, is that the authors essentially open a window into their brain. So they just like open this window, they let you in, and you get to sit inside their heads. You get to sit inside someone else's head and see how they think and experience the world. And I think that's so special. And this is one of those books that did that for me, and it changed the way I saw sexual assault survivors. It changed the way I understood sexual assault as a lifetime experience rather than just a moment in time. The next one is a hilarious book. This book made me laugh out loud every single chapter, and that's Laughing All the Way to the Mosque by Zarqa Nawaz. I keep recommending this to people. This is again in the vein of something you care about. So I am a Muslim who kind of grew up in a lot of different countries and communities, and Zarqa talks about growing up Muslim in Canada, and it's just hilarious. And the way she does it is she does it in a way where it's very easy to digest. Each chapter focuses on one particular thing. So it's like Muslim camp, or it's about her and something that she has done for work that is now controversial in her community and how she's managing that. She's just so hilarious. I love her. She also writes comedy. She wrote the series Little Mosque on the Prairie, and it's such a fun comfort show that I keep going back to. So again, something you care about, and this is a really funny one if you want like a laugh out loud memoir to read about. If even like, I feel like it's also cool if you're just curious about what it means to be Muslim in the West. I think she does a good job of kind of talking about it in a hilarious way. The next one is The Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley by Malcolm X. This is again for me both something I was really curious about and something that I cared about, because I think all of us have heard about Malcolm X, especially if you're a Muslim. It's a little bit more of a like, ooh, like I want to read more about Malcolm X. And it has always been on my mind. I think this is a really good one. If you're just like me and you're curious about Malcolm X, go read this. Malcolm X is such an incredible character of growth, about what it means to acknowledge when you're in the wrong and to look at life in hindsight and to shift gears, and not just in like a mental way, in a literal way, in what you do, in your actions. And you experience that with him. I'm so glad this book exists because you get to kind of see it all in a very comprehensive one book format. So those were all the memoirs that I'm recommending. I could go on and on. There's so many incredibly great memoirs. Again, fall back on the content frameworks and see what you can find. The second format might be a little unexpected, but hear me out. The second format is essay collections. And the reason I think essay collections really work for fiction readers is a lot of the content that you're consuming outside of books when you're reading is already nonfiction. So this is like articles you're reading for work or just in your personal time. If you're reading articles about things you're interested about, blog articles, it could be news articles. These are all already within a format that you're familiar with. What essay collections essentially do is they take this format that you're familiar with. So they take a bunch of articles and they just put it all together in a book. And that's familiar. You're not gonna feel too much like, wait, what is going on? And that's what I really love about essay collections. And I think they're also easier to read because when you are reading nonfiction, it's different from reading escapist fiction. You're reading things that are real world. Sometimes it's heavier. Sometimes you want to spend time thinking about it and ruminating on it. Essay collections are divided in a way that you can read an essay and you can take your time thinking about it. You can ruminate on it, you can maybe research a little bit more on it, and that provides a really good structure to kind of get into the book and get into that flow state. So the goal of all of these formatting is to get into the same flow state that you get into when you're reading fiction. And the memoirs are already going to do that for you with their storytelling. Essay collections help you do that through the way that the book is divided. Some of my favorite recent nonfictions were all essay collections. The first one is one that I already spoke about. But when I spoke about it, I said that this is not going to be the last time I speak about it. And clearly it's not, because I'm speaking about it again. And that's Perfect Victims by Mohammed Al-Kurd. I will not stop talking about this book. Perfect Victims is about the politics of appeal. Mohammed Al-Kurd talks about what it means to be Palestinian in the context of being the perfect victim. And he does it so well. And this essay collection, every single essay has something different to offer, and the depth of both research and academic integrity in the work he does, like he did his due diligence. Like the footnotes are or 2 pages, at least 2 to 3 pages for every chapter, but also the heart that he brings to it, like the poetry, the real people that he has spoken to, and the way that he tells their stories in relation to these intellectual conversations as well, is so well done. It's such a good balance of everything. And the reason I've put it here in the essay collection section is that each chapter does read like an essay. And like I said, I took my time where I would sit back from each and I would think about it, I'd ruminate on it, I'd maybe even have a few conversations about the particular essay I just read, go back, look at the highlights, and then I'd move on to the next. A lot like what I would do with news articles or articles online. So Perfect Victims. The second one is one that I read last year that I can't stop thinking about, and that is A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. This book completely changed the way I think about Indigenous lives to this day. So Alicia Elliott is Haudenosaunee, and she talks about the experience of being Indigenous in Canada today, in modern day Canada, and the lack of justice for people who are Indigenous and native to their lands is horrifying. And the way that it's this casual thing that people are just supposed to live around is terrifying. And Alicia Elliott does an incredible job of taking you through that. Once again, an author who is capable of both letting you feel what she felt through words, but also giving you the intellectual academic understanding of what this issue actually is. In terms of legislature, in terms of history, and politics, what does it mean to have these particular issues? This entire book, I could quote the entire book, it's so well done. Another thing I think that makes it stand out is that every essay is of a different length. There was one that was just like a page or two, and I think there were essays that were a couple of pages. Some were incredibly rich with academic literature. Some of them were a lot more about her own experience and what it meant for her to go through what she went through. So I would recommend reading this entire collection. It has a really good variety of everything. And it talks about something that I think a lot of us should care about, which is what it means to be Indigenous and have that taken away from you and just be expected to be okay with it. A third one is You Have Not Yet Been Defeated by Ala Abdel Fattah. So Ala is a revolutionary who played a prominent role in the Arab Spring in Egypt. And since the Arab Spring, he has been in and out of basically he's been arbitrarily detained multiple times in prison in Egypt. And this collection, it encompasses him before, during the revolution, and before, as well as letters and essays that he wrote while he was detained and in the brief stints that he wasn't detained. And it's such an interesting book because you want to, first of all, I when I first reviewed it, I said this is a book about revolutions. This is a book that revolutionizes your thinking about revolutions, and it changes the way you think about modern day revolutions. But also on top of that, what really surprised me is that you get a lot of essays about what Ala did professionally in the IT industry, his thoughts about that. You get to, like I said, you get to sit in his mind and see what it means to think the way that Ala thinks. And it's such a gift. And this is how I generally feel about a lot of these nonfiction books that lean towards memoirs, but that are also essay collections about thought. You get to spend an entire book experiencing what it means to think like another person. That's what all these three collections were for me. Specifically, this particular one, You Have Not Yet Been Defeated. So those were the essay collections. For the next format, it's a really obvious one. And I know everyone's gonna say it's a really obvious one, but I just think that this is an underused tactic when you're getting into reading something you're not used to, and that is read short books. Short books are like the feeling of completing a book is gonna already give you the catharsis to give it another shot or to keep going. And with nonfiction, what you're gonna find is that length does not change the depth of the book. Often the shortest books can have the highest impact on you. These recommendations I have for you only prove that rule. So if you can't seem to get into anything, just try to read a short book. Again, think within the content frameworks. The first recommendation for this is something very much in the vein of something you're curious about, and it's very particular. So it's for anyone who loves physics. I loved physics growing up, and I know I'm an outlier. I experienced that, but I loved physics. When I first started reading nonfiction, I completely out of the blue picked up 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. This particular book is 81 pages long, so it's short. Anything under 100 pages, I'm counting as a short book. And it literally felt like I was back in the classroom, and I missed it. Because again, I grew up a STEM kid, and I never returned back to that place of learning, at least not in an structured academic environment. So to be able to pick up a book and to re-enter the classroom was really special for me. If you are someone who loves physics too, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics is not going to give you as much information, but I think Carlo Rovelli writes about science like a child would write about candy. Like, it's so special, and he gives it such a bigger picture, holistic view from the world. So I would still say read 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, and then read The Order of Time. This is not a short book, but I just have to talk about it when we talk about Carlo Rovelli, because The Order of Time, he literally sits down with you as a physicist, and he's like, okay, let's figure out scientifically what time actually is. It's one of my favorite books of all time, pun intended. And then the last one I have here is Reality Is Not What It Seems, which is about quantum gravity. So this is very much in the vein of something you're curious about. If this isn't something you're curious about, you can skip this. The next short book I'm going to recommend is The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House by Audre Lorde. Very short. This is only 51 pages long. There's a collection of Penguin Modern Classics that nonfiction that are all really, really short, like around 50 or 40 pages long. So if you can find them, you should give them a shot. This particular one is, I hadn't read this. I read this only this year, and it's such an interesting perspective on decolonization in a way that I had never ever thought about it before. It's about system change. It's about understanding that the fundamental decolonization is something that you gotta dig through the root. You can't just like change face and hope for the best. The next one is The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han. Byung-Chul Han is a German-Korean philosopher. He writes in German, I believe. These are translated. All his books are really short, so this one is only 60 pages long. But again, this is the same with like, it's short, but it has a lot of depth. So I take my time reading his books. I definitely want to read more. The Burnout Society in particular is about burnout. It's about how the way our society functions and has formed is fundamentally causing burnout, rather than, oh my God, I keep going through burnout, there must be something wrong with me, which is exactly how I felt. Reading The Burnout Society made me realize, one, it validated a lot of what I was going through, but it also gave me context and understanding of how society functions and how that causes a lot of burnout. So he writes a lot about modern issues in a philosophical standpoint, obviously from a lot of academic research as well. Another book of his that I've been eyeing is The Palliative Society, so you kind of get an idea of what he writes about. Okay, so we've done all the recommendations essentially for the short books. So we've had all of these recommendations for each format, but there is one book there's one book that satisfies all the criteria. So it is a memoir, it is a short book, and it's an essay collection. And I guess for me, it's something I care about and something I was curious about as well. So it satisfies everything. And that is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. James Baldwin, you absolute legend, because the writing, just ignore everything else. The writing in this book is so incredibly good. So The Fire Next Time is, I think it is only like 2 letters that he writes to his nephew, again about being young and black in America, or just being young and different. And it's such a special collection. This is only 89 pages long. I read this in one morning and it stuck with me, and it's still stuck with me. I read this last year and it was one of my favorite books of the year. So read Baldwin and read The Fire Next Time. So that's it for nonfiction for fiction readers. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I have way more books on my reading list than I actually have read, and nonfiction is one of those genres. So I'm really happy that I made this video, because it's making me want to tackle my nonfiction TBR as well. Share with me, like, if you're a fiction reader, what's a nonfiction book that actually got you into reading nonfiction, or that you actually enjoyed. And if you like this video, obviously give it a like and subscribe if you like this sort of content, and turn on the notifications so you can be notified every single time I post. And share this with anyone who you think might benefit from it as well. So that's it for me. I'm gonna finally take a sip of my peach iced tea, which has now gone lukewarm. And I'll see you at the next video.